Yes, we are live now.
Okay, should we start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Jinnah. I'm a member of the Progressive Writers Association UK, and today we're really pleased to have this special discussion on the new book by Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed called Jinnah, His Successes, Failures and Role in History, a major study of the ideas and political role of the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So today we have got three great guests, and we have the author, Ishtiaq Ahmed, and discussants, Salil Mishra and Pervez Hoodbhoy. Before we start, I'm just going to do some housekeeping. If you're on Zoom, can you please mute your mic, but keep your video on if possible. And at the end of the talk, we'll have a Q&A session and you can unmute yourself then. Okay, so that's the housekeeping. Before we start, I'm just going to tell you a bit about PWA UK. So the PWA UK, reorganised in 2019, is associated with the Progressive Writers Association, a literary movement conceived in the struggle for freedom and social justice by the writers Mulk Raj Anand and Sajjad Zahir and others in Britain in 1935. As a result, the association was established in Lucknow in 1936. Even after the partition, the movement played an important role in giving the arts and literature of India and Pakistan a pro-people flavour. The PWA as a movement has come a long way and has many branches in the subcontinent and diaspora, either independently or in association with the parent organisation. So that's a bit about the PWA, and today I'm hosting this with my comrades Waqas Bhatt and Kanwal Dhaliwal. So let's begin. So a quick list of the order of events. First, we'll hear from our speaker, Salil Mishra, then Pervez Hoodbhoy, and then Ishtiaq Ahmed. And we'll have about 20 minutes roughly for each speaker. So before I welcome Salil to speak, I'll just read out a short biography about him. So Professor Mishra acquired his master's degree in modern Indian history from the Center for Historical Studies, JNU, New Delhi, from where he went on to do a PhD in communal politics in UP 37 to 39 under the supervision of Professor Bipin Chandra. His publications include A Narrative of Communal Politics, Uttar Pradesh 1937 to 39, published in 2001, and a monograph in Hindi entitled Swaraj Party, brought out by the National Book Trust, Delhi in 1997. The booklet was part of NBT's mission to produce historical accounts of the freedom struggle for rural audiences, and it has been translated into many Indian regional languages. He was involved in the research project Towards Freedom for the year 1942, sponsored by the Indian Council of Historical Research as a member of the editorial team. The volume has been published by Oxford University Press, and he has published articles on themes related to communal politics, language questions, Hindi, Urdu, partition of India, social science teaching, and identity politics. So they're a very brief bio of our guest, Salil Mishra.
Could you?
Yes, please. Shall I begin, or it just got discontinued, so I wonder.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So shall I begin then? Thank you very much. Well, I hope I am audible. I am extremely, extremely thankful to PWA for giving me this opportunity to speak to you on such an important book. I am also extremely thankful to Ishtiaq Sahab for writing this book, because it was a kind of book that many of us, but I particularly, we had been waiting for. So delighted that this book finally came. Well, this is a book on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and any book on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, by implication, also becomes a book on the making of Pakistan, some kind of an account of the making of Pakistan, given the relationship between the two. It is a very big book. And I think as I look at the book, it has three different components. Firstly, there is a descriptive component of the book, the most meticulous part, extensively documented. Then there is an argumentative component, argumentative side of the book, in which he tends to stand at a particular location. And thirdly, I found that there are some very important ideas, very economic formulation, very important formulations that he has made, which I had not come across earlier, which are generally not found in the books. So there are many new ideas, even though it's now become very difficult to say anything new on a theme on which so much has been written. But I think there are some very new formulations. So I would like to divide my talk into these three parts: the descriptive component of the book, the argumentative component of the book, and some new formulations. This is a book which is based on Jinnah's writings and speeches, Muslim League records, British records, many sources in Pakistan, which are actually not accessible to Indian scholars. So I think it's a treasure. For that reason alone, it's a treasure for us in India. As the book proceeds, it recognizes a point that individuals go through changes, real, genuine changes in ideology, in political universe actually come about. These changes are not simply created by scholars, they actually exist. And in the book, there is a clear recognition that Jinnah's politics went through many phases, 4 different phases to be precise. And each phase is very, very important. First, of course, is the phase of anti-imperialist Indian nationalism. Jinnah is a member of the Congress. He joins Muslim League only on the terms that Muslim League must veer towards anti-imperialism. He brings the two closer. So there is a pact between Congress and the Muslim League in which Jinnah plays a very important role. He's also largely responsible for a big shift in the politics of the Muslim League from its very loyalist pro-British conservative phase into some kind of an anti-imperialist phase. So Jinnah is a very important actor in that phase and in that shift in the politics of the Muslim League. The first phase is then followed by the second phase, which Ishtiaq Sahab identifies as a phase of Muslim communitarianism. And this phase begins, let's say, from 1924. Now, in the book, 1924 emerges as a very big divide. It's a very important divide. It's a very important year. If you would know, Khilafat movement has just got over. Muslim League is reorienting itself. There are new questions. There are new dilemmas. First dilemma, of course, is India is a large and plural society. Muslims constitute about 1/4 of the population. What kind of constitutional political arrangement will ensure a just and a fair environment for them? Would it be a centralized political structure or a federalized political structure? And I think in this context, the book makes a very important point. The important point that the book makes is that this centralization versus federalization is probably an inadequate, unsatisfactory, and definitely a wrong kind of a binary, because the two actually include each other. They are accommodative of each other. It's possible for a constitutional structure to be both centralized in some parts and also federalized in some other parts. So it's not a kind of either or. Therefore, given that, it should have been possible to envisage a constitutional structure which was both centralized in some respects, but with enough space, enough recognition, enough autonomy for various federating federal units, either of religion or of region or of other kinds. And the argument in the book is that the Nehru report of 1928 did try to create a structure of this kind. It should have been possible for Jinnah to work with the Nehru report and to negotiate a good deal. But he boycotted it, unfortunately, and it was a kind of an opportunity lost. I mean, if the idea was to work towards an arrangement, towards an options, and options, mind you, they do not exist in an a priori manner. To choose and pick from options, one has to work to create them from a certain raw material of political alignments. One creates options which are suitable. If the idea was to work towards an arrangement which would be short of political separation between Hindus and Muslims within India, short of a separation, but which would still recognize and make space for the distinctiveness of Indian Muslims as a group, the Nehru report was a good opportunity to work towards. It contained this possibility, but unfortunately the possibility was not materialized and Jinnah boycotted the Nehru report. The third stage was marked by a kind of a tension within Jinnah's political universe, a tension between Muslim communitarianism on the one hand and an alternative developing nascent Muslim nationalism on the other hand. And within Jinnah's political universe, there is a kind of a pull and push. He's being pulled into these directions. There are pulls of a residual Muslim communitarianism, but there is also an alternative pull from an emergent, newly emerging, rising, alternative separatist Muslim nationalism. Or let us say that the idea of Muslim nationalism, a separate alternative Muslim nationalism, had begun to emanate out of the unresolved contradictions of Muslim communitarianism. I mean, that's the point the book makes, that the tensions of Muslim communitarianism were not resolved, and which in some ways created the opening for this alternative, rival, separatist Muslim nationalism. Now, this set the stage in the 1930s for a very crucial contest, very decisive contest between Indian nationalism and Muslim nationalism. Now, both of them, they try to reach out to Muslims, minds and hearts of the Muslims, but with their own programs and agenda. Jinnah by this time is firmly on the side of a separatist alternative Muslim nationalism. Now, at this point, yet another important contribution made by the book is to see both these Indian nationalism and Muslim nationalism as rival ideas. Both these rival ideas as socially constituted, not inherent, a priori, fixed, stable ideas, but completely socially constituted, produced by a certain context. They were rivals to each other. Both of them were complex. Both Indian nationalism and Muslim nationalism could be negated by multiple social realities based on class, based on culture, based on language, and many other such factors. Therefore, the argument about the historical validity of one and the falsity of the other, which is very widespread in India, probably does not work. It does not really work. So how does one decide? Well, in the end, what clinches the issue and what clinched the issue was A, some form of official recognition by the colonial state. And 2, B, success in reaching out to the minds and hearts of the people. There was no a priori decider in this context. The context was open-ended. It could go either way. There was nothing historically valid about one and false about the other. Hence, not the formulation that truth prevails in the end, but the formulation that what prevails in the end is the truth, becomes the truth. That seems to be a more valid idea and closer to what eventually happened. There were also many other ideas and imaginations on this question, on the theme of nationalism. There was this imagination of Khalistan, Punjab-based. There was this imagination of Dravidistan, but they fail both the tests. The official recognition and also the popular test of people's minds and hearts, people's allegiance, reaching out successfully to people's minds and hearts. The fourth phase of Jinnah's politics begins after the making of Pakistan. So much for the descriptive, factual, the narrative side of the book. The argumentative component, argumentative side of the book is just as important, probably more important in some ways. You see, in social science inquiry, when scholars look up at the ideas of other people, other researchers in the field, then they develop a kind of a response vis-a-vis earlier researches. It has to be done. Research is a journey. Many people are joined in it. So when we work, we look at the kind of ideas which have already been generated. And we develop our own response vis-a-vis earlier researches. Now, in the response of one scholar vis-a-vis researches done earlier, there could be osmosis, there could be reaction, revision, addition, modification. These are some of the available trajectories available to a scholar. Now, when Ishtiaq Sahab was writing his book on Jinnah, some formulations obviously already existed as a kind of an inheritance of ideas. There was, for instance, a kind of Hector Bolito, Stanley Wolpert stream or a strand. Now, this was very close to official version, very, very endorsing, very, very uncritical, very descriptive, but sometimes it could be selectively descriptive, choosing to describe one reality more than the other reality. That prerogative is always there with the scholar, so long as the scholar states the principles for being selective. So there was this Hector Bolito, Stanley Wolpert strand or a stream. And of course, there was the Aisha Jalal stream or a strand. It was not so much of a stream, but more of a sledgehammer intervention. It was not a kind of an addition of a little bit or a deletion or a modification or a shift in focus or some kind or a different highlight. It was a different game altogether. It was a different route altogether, a very, very different route altogether, a different game altogether. It was some kind of an attempted paradigm shift in the game, in the business, to shift completely the goalpost, everything about the historical theme. If you followed it, if you followed the paradigm shift, then all the earlier researches on the theme would be redundant, irrelevant, and unpursuable. You just cannot connect. You cannot connect them. It was not critiquing or advancing the earlier inquiry. She was not doing any of that, or building on it, or modifying it, but bypassing it completely. So very rich, very important works existed, which were completely neglected, deliberately bypassed. In a way, it was a case of hitting the conventional wisdom on its head. There was a kind of a conventional wisdom which existed on the theme of on Jinnah's role in the partition, that was hit on the head. I will not go into her story. I assume that some of us are familiar with it, but I will talk a little bit about how I think Ishtiaq Sahab reacted to that book. And I'm sure that he reacted to the book. That he was provoked by it is probably an understatement of the evening. And if I say that, I cannot be credited with making any important or an original point. And I do want to make an important and original point. So let me make the other point, which I should be credited with. That he was provoked by it, of course, is an understatement, but he was also inspired by the book in some ways, in a very, very negative kind of a way. He was inspired by how not to do certain things. So in a way, the book, the picture in my mind is that the book negatively inspired him. Let me explain by making 2 points. I think I want to make I think there are 2 methodological dimensions to her approach, which he decided not to pursue and not to follow. I am at this point not talking about their substantive conclusions, their substantive point, their different formulations. I'm only talking about 2 methodological points, which are very palpably there in her book. And I think he learned a thing or two about them, about what not to do. First methodological point is on the relationship between fact and argument, fact and formulation. Now, in social science inquiry, the relationship is simple but profound. Arguments must be based on facts. and we should not be too selective about our facts. Now, this approach of being unselective about fact, about story, this carries the risk of the tyranny of facts, or the risk of the book becoming over-determined by the fact. The risk is always there, and I might point out that these possibilities are there in Ishtiaq Sahab's book. The book, sometimes one can accuse it of being somewhat over-determined by facts and narratives. But this risk has got to be confronted. The other approach, this approach of going by facts, it successfully avoids the other risk, in which argument becomes a substitute for the fact. Argument becomes the fact. Facts, narratives, they become redundant. Argument, they become not just secondary, they become redundant. Argument actually takes over. The a priori virtually becomes the same as the substantive conclusion arrived at. So if the a priori in Aisha Jalal's book is that Jinnah did not want partition, how could he want partition? He was an intelligent man. Did he not know that 1/3 of the Muslims are scattered all over the country? Did he not know that in Punjab and Bengal, there are sizable 45% of non-Muslim minorities? How could he have done it? So there is a kind of an a priori that he could not possibly have wanted partition or Pakistan. This is the a priori, and that's also the substantive conclusion. So there are the facts that completely bypassed. Arguments become the base from which you deduce more arguments. Now, this is the strength of Ishtiaq Sahab's book. His book is full of facts, narratives, details. The book has 741 pages, minus bibliography, minus index and preface, etc. Every argument, he makes arguments. It is a very argumentative book, but every argument is substantiated with enough details, He is in fact over generous. He sometimes overstates the point in substantiation, but it is never under substantiation. Sometimes I would accuse him of over substantiating, if anything. The second methodological point is that Jalal's book has a curious inversion of the social science idea. The social science idea is that truth, and by truth I mean not moral truth, cognitive truth, truth about knowledge and inquiry. Truth is generally not available on the surface. If it was, then you don't need social scientists. You don't need social science inquiry. Anyone can access the truth. What exists on the surface is froth. The scholar has to meander through the mishmash, dig deep, unearth facts, practice a kind of psychology. The psychology is that when people say something, they may not always mean it. People speak and write to hide their true thoughts. So one has to somehow go through all this zigzag to get to their real thoughts. You cannot place so much of value on what they say and what they write. So at one stroke, all Jinnah's speeches and formal statements are eliminated by Aisha Jalal from the inquiry because it's spurious data. It's obviously not reliable. So all that is eliminated from the inquiry. Now, methodologically, the idea may be fine, but there is an inversion. And the inversion is what exists on the surface is untrue, because truth cannot exist on the surface. You don't have to dig very deep on what lies beneath. All that you do is, you know that what lies on the surface is untruth. Truth is just the opposite of it. So if the surface tells you that Jinnah was very serious and very uncompromising about his Pakistan, then you know what to do. Just invert it. And then you get to the truth. The invert is that it was just the opposite. The truth was just the opposite because it exists on the surface. It has to be deeper, and some psychology has to establish that Jinnah did not really mean what he said. It is this kind of a methodological pitfall that Ishtiaq Sahab's book also avoids completely. This book practices what I would say good old conventional social science. He treats his subject, and the subject in this case is Jinnah. He treats his subject which is Jinnah, with a lot of respect, with a lot of trust. He trusts Jinnah. He pays great attention to what Jinnah wrote and what Jinnah said. The data which emanates from Jinnah, it forms the bedrock on which he makes his formulations. He does not think, he does not believe that Jinnah knew not what he was doing. Jinnah was not some less intelligent. We need to give him due credit. He wasn't a remarkably intelligent man. He does not think that Jinnah knew not what he was doing, or Jinnah was unaware of the consequences of his actions. B, Ishtiaq Sahab does not believe that Jinnah was playing a fraud, cheating his blind, unsuspecting Muslim followers. He was not doing that. Jinnah was not a cheat. He was not playing a fraud. He was very serious about what he was doing and what he wanted. In a way, Ishtiaq Sahab's book gives Jinnah his due, which is the important thing. The book recognizes the importance of both ideology, that is to say, a belief system, and also a strategy. When ideas become a social force, they become powerful and irresistible. Jinnah did not create those ideas, but he played a great role in their dissemination as an ideologue. And as a strategist, he played an extremely important role in his dealings with the British and with the Congress. So I think these are important facets which got to be recognized. I think I also wanted to take up the third part, in which I would have talked about some very important formulations made in the book, which have not been made earlier and not in other books. But I think I will not go into it. My time is up. I think I will stop now. I've taken a little over 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mishra. So now next we will welcome Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy. Before we start, I'm just going to give a short biography as well. Professor Hoodbhoy is a nuclear physicist and activist concerned with the promotion of freedom of speech, secularism, and education in Pakistan. He is an alumnus of MIT, and in 2013, he was made a member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament. Currently, he serves as Zora and ZZ Ahmed Foundation Distinguished Professor at the Foreman Christian College in Lahore, Pakistan. Dr. Hoodbhoy is the author of Islam and Science, Religious Orthodoxy and the Battle for Rationality, now published in 8 languages. He created and anchored a series of TV programs on Pakistan's education system and 2 other series that aimed at bringing scientific concepts to ordinary members of the public. As the head of the Marshall Books in Lahore, he leads a major translation effort to produce books in Urdu that promote modern thought, human rights, and emancipation of women. So that's a brief introduction. Can we please welcome Professor Hoodbhoy?
Well, thank you. I am quite overwhelmed. I heard Professor Mishra with great attention, and I'm awed by his grasp of social science and the methodology, and of course his comments on Ishtiaq's book. Well, when Ishtiaq sent me that book, I said, my God, who's going to read this? It's 765 pages. And people just don't have that kind of stamina. And why is it necessary 75 years after partition? We should be over with our fascination about the actors of partition by now. And we should have been, and we would have been, if partition had led to a happy state of affairs. But obviously it did not. And so many, many misconceptions exist in Pakistan on Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And that is why Ishtiaq Ahmed's book has the importance that it has. Jinnah is owned equally by liberals in Pakistan. By the way, I am here in Islamabad, and every time that there is some kind of a occasion, well, you hear the words of the sayings of Jinnah being recited. On the 14th of August, we had exhortations, one after the other, of following the Quaid-e-Azam's vision for Pakistan. And Jinnah remains above the fray and celebrated as, of course, nobody else. But the misconceptions that exist means that he is owned equally by liberals as well as Islamists, and no attempt, we have some music, and there is a conscious attempt to deny facts. So in this context, I think the extent of detail that Ishtiaq has provided is absolutely necessary. Okay, let me tell you what are the important questions that one should be asking about Jinnah 75 years later. These are not of my choosing, but I believe that these are the most important because they're so often talked about. First, what did Jinnah really want? Did he want a Pakistan that would be a secular, liberal democracy? Because after all, we know that Jinnah's personal life was one in which he was, by all accounts, a man who was liberal in his upbringing, in his education, in the way that he ate, drank, and then married, of course, as well. And so the assumption of Pakistani liberals has been that he wanted Pakistan to be a secular democratic state. And they are bolstered by his 11th of August 1947 speech, wherein he said very clearly that you can go to your mosque, you can go to your church, this has got to your temple, this has got nothing to do with the business of the state. And so, although he was reticent on the issue of secularism, in fact, every time that he was asked whether Pakistan was to be a secular state, he would brush off the question. He'd say, what is secularism? And he'd give some kind of a complicated answer that Islam has it all. But this speech of 11th of August 1947 is unparalleled in his history. And one of the things that Ishtiaq Ahmed does is he very carefully dissects that speech and tells us three important reasons why that speech was made and why it had such a huge impact upon the minorities of Pakistan, but not upon the others. Well, I'll leave it for Ishtiaq to explain why, but in a nutshell, it was that Pakistan was just about to be made. Jinnah did not want that. It did not want hordes of refugees, a flood of refugees to enter into Pakistan and overwhelm the new government that would be set up over there. It was just in the process of being set up. He knew, as a second reason, he knew that Pakistan would want assistance from the world and to appear so focused upon religion would then reduce sympathy for Pakistan. And so this was an attempt to persuade the rest of the world that Pakistan would be an open, liberal state, safe for minorities. And third, and this I would ask Ishtiaq to explain, that there was some Hindu leader who wrote to Mr. Jinnah and said, you are not just Quaid-e-Azam for Muslims only, you are the leader of all Pakistanis. And so perhaps this addressed a slight ego problem there. Okay, so this is the kind of analysis that we need. Yes, I know that a lot of people have commented on this, but what one needs is clarity of expression. What one needs is supportive evidence. And this is what Ishtiaq provides in this particular episode. So I can't tell you how important this one speech is, because every time that we here in Pakistan have minorities speaking about their experiences, they begin with this as if this was as if they were quoting from the book of Genesis. Ishtiaq also takes up a very fundamental question. What is it that Jinnah wanted? Did he want a theocratic state? Now, that obviously is easily disposed of, because he explicitly said that he could not tolerate the rule of mullahs. And so there's no dispute on that. But on the other hand, he would make repeated recourse to the Sharia. And he did that, for example, even in 1948, while speaking before the Bar Association in Karachi. And he said, why are you afraid of being of Sharia as the law of the land? After all, aren't all solutions present in Islam? And so there is a kind of dichotomy that you find over there. And this is why you can fish into the bag of Mr. Jinnah's speeches and you can get out practically whatever you want. So if he said X one day in one situation, he could easily say minus X in the next day in some other situation. This also then brings into question the outlines of the state that Mr. Jinnah wanted or may have wanted. We don't know, because he actually never wrote a book, never wrote a draft constitution. And yet we are told that he had a vision for Pakistan. So yes, he did give speeches, and they're very rousing speeches. But where was his vision for Pakistan? Now, this is a little off the topic, but Akbar S. Ahmed, the professor at the American University in Washington, he is, of course, very popular in Pakistan. He's an anthropologist of great distinction, and he's invited by the media. And he is best known for his movie on Jinnah called Jinnah. So this year, just a few weeks ago, he was asked to present, to give a message, which was then broadcast again and again by Radio Pakistan and by Pakistan Television, in which he exhorted everyone to adhere to Jinnah's vision of Pakistan. And so I wrote to him, I said, Akbar, can you tell me what Jinnah wanted? Can you tell me, can you point to any one single document that he might have authored? Can you tell me where, for example, he might have written that feudalism would be done away with? And the response was, he didn't. The response from Akbar S. Ahmed was that Jinnah left it to the people of Pakistan to decide. And so if one wants to know what Pakistan was to be and whether Jinnah had a plan. Well, I suggest that you turn over Ishtiaq Ahmed's book and look for speeches there wherein Jinnah explicitly warns his followers, and this is before 1947, not to ask about what the future state is to be. Will it be a liberal democracy? Will it be an Islamic state? And if an Islamic state, in what shape or form? Because, as you might know, the Islamic state doesn't have an existence in the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad never appointed his successor, and never has there ever been and there is no mention in the hadiths, which are the sayings of the Prophet, his life, of an Islamic state. So certainly Jinnah is not to be faulted for not giving an outline of the Islamic state, but the fact is that as you search through his speeches, you do not find any blueprint for Pakistan. And so then comes along 1947, and then everything has to be then thought from afresh. Ishtiaq also makes this very valid point that Jinnah and the Muslim League, the Muslim League members, the ones in the highest positions, and the ones who then became prime ministers and chief secretaries later, all were large landlords. There were a few capitalists from Bombay, but very few, and there was no plan for land reform. And in fact, as Ishtiaq points out, Jinnah was actually very strongly anti-socialist and anti-communist, and thought that Nehru's secularism and Nehru's socialism was not to be emulated at all. So actually, this is one of the reasons why this is the principal reason why the Muslim League fell apart just a few years after, actually 3 years after Pakistan came into existence. So these were the confusions that were present at birth. And going through Ishtiaq's book, one can understand the trail from the past up here to the present. I think this book is remarkable because it gives you a timeline from Jinnah's very early days in politics to 1947, and then going beyond Jinnah to much later, to almost to the present epoch, where we see that Pakistan today is still struggling to find direction. The present political crisis has in fact exposed that. It has shown us that the weakness of the original idea of the two-nation theory, and Ishtiaq gives a good description of how the two-nation theory started and how it was actively promoted after a certain point by Jinnah. Now, Jinnah's own evolution is very interesting. After the Lucknow Pact is disavowed, Jinnah then starts thinking differently, but slowly. But that slowness stops in 1937 when the Muslim League suffers a huge defeat at the hands of the Unionist Party in Punjab. And then the age of communalism then begins, because as Jinnah realized, and he was very, very sharp politically, he understood that if the Muslims are ever to get a separate homeland, then there is no way that the religion card cannot be used. It must be used. And therefore, as Ishtiaq documents very ably, I'd say, he would spurn every opportunity offered by Congress to appoint for Congress to appoint a Muslim leader, a Muslim representative. And this, in fact, was one of the reasons for the breakdown of the cabinet mission plan. So I could go on. I'll just stop over here and say that, yes, in spite of its enormous volume, we do need reference works like this. Maybe nobody will read it through all the way. After all, life makes so many demands upon us. But what we need is something that can tell us authoritatively, with references, with data, and making a definite point. So I understand what Professor Mishra is saying, that that a social scientist has to follow a certain methodology, not just choose data that will fit his or her hypothesis, his or her point of view. But here I think Ishtiaq has done a good job at this. It's maybe a bit too much. The narrative is, after all, rather extensive, but here is something that will be useful for many years, many decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hoodbhoy. So now I'm going to hand over to Comrade Wakas, who's going to take over.
Thank you, Jinnah. That is a great opportunity to listening to very prominent South Asian professor, one based in India, one in Pakistan, and now we are going to listen a third South Asian professor based in Europe. As you know, Dr. Ishtiaq is a well-known social scientist. He was born in Lahore in 1947, and you can say he's a few months older than Pakistan. He has done his PhD from University of Stockholm, and he's still the professor of emeritus there. He is delivering lectures and teaching courses all over the world in very prominent universities. He's contributing in various journals, well-known journals all over the world, and also different chapters in many books. He has written 7 books, well-researched, very important books with their topics. For example, state, nation, and ethnicity, garrison state, the Pakistan military in politics, the concept of Islamic State in Pakistan, reflection of a concerned global citizen, and Punjab blooded partition. And now, today we are talking about his latest book, Jinnah. And we are very thankful, as Professor Mishra said, we are really very thankful to Dr. Ishtiaq to take time to write this book. And everybody is eager to listen Dr. Ishtiaq today. So I don't want to waste time. I'm requesting Dr. Ishtiaq, please.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking the Progressive Writers Association UK and my dear colleagues, friends who have invited me, who have hosted this talk. and my two colleagues, Salil Mishra and Pervez Hoodbhoy, for their fantastic observations, comments on my book. I am simply overwhelmed. Now, if we were to look at Professor Mishra's comments on my book, I was just wondering that did Aisha Jalal, in not choosing to look at the speeches of Jinnah, come up with a psychological theory explaining why those speeches, those statements could be just set aside, and she could read his mind and tell us that while saying all this that I have documented in the book, he didn't mean a word of what he was saying. Like, for example, already on the 25th of March, that is 2 days after the Lahore resolution had been moved and then passed on the 24th, he gave a press conference and he said, let me make it very clear that the Lahore resolution is about the division of India. And from that time onwards, until Pakistan comes into being, I would like Aisha Jalal, who reads his mind without looking at what he has said and done, negotiated, at any point coming up with an explanation how she can come to a contrary conclusion from what Jinnah had been doing, saying, and so on. So what I miss in her book are two things. One is, and I think for me that's unacceptable, that you advance a thesis which is so much of an obfuscation, distortion of the actual reality, that you can at your own pleasure come up with a thesis which cannot be supported by any evidence around to substantiate it. So I think Aisha Jalal is not simply assuming that he was very intelligent and very much aware of the fact that 45% of the population of West Pakistan would be maybe non-Muslims and 30% of Muslims will be left in India. I think he put that all aside. And I've even looked at Jinnah as a personality. What sort of a leader was he? I think he had a very strong ego, and he could not brook being second fiddle to anyone. And I argue that factor played a very important role as he chose his political options while dealing with people around him, especially Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru. Look at the way he brutally mistreated Maulana Abul Kalam Azad when in July he said, let's form a government of the Muslim League and the Congress and ask the British to transfer power. He says, you are a renegade to Islam and a poster boy of the Congress. Azad had written this in confidence. Jinnah published this correspondence just to insult him publicly. So I think Jinnah was a very vain man. And I think he was very well aware of the fact that by hammering from morning to evening that Hindus and Muslims have nothing in common and to keep them together in one state would lead to civil war, became a conviction of his. And he saw a way out of his vengeance against Gandhi by what happened during the Second World War. He joined hands with the British. Unfortunately, this was not brought up, how important was for Jinnah to move from the margins into the center by some omissions of the Indian National Congress. For example, one, that they decided not to support the war effort. Mahatma Gandhi, by the way, I've been reading subsequently, went and met Lilith Go and said that my sympathies are with the British and something like he would be very unhappy if Westminster Abbey was bombed and all that, but the Congress overruled him. Now, I do understand the argument the Congress put forward that how can we fight for the freedom of the world when we are ourselves enslaved? So make us independent and then we'll do our duty. Fine. But in the way the politics worked out, and Jinnah and Lithgow are both on record telling us why they need each other to advance their own political agendas. And so for me, Jinnah was determined to have India partitioned. He could not have been absolutely sure. That I share with anyone, with Professor Mishra, Pervez Hoodbhoy, anybody knows the situation, even with Ayesha Jalal. So if the British had not wanted to partition India, there would be no partition of India, and then we'll be telling a very different story. But Jinnah's aim was to have India partitioned, and for having India partitioned, he chose all those arguments which would, on the one hand, create hatred between Muslims and Hindus, and on the other hand, mobilize all sorts of disparate Muslim groups, Shias, Sunnis, Ahmadis, Barelvis. I've given all that evidence. The type of promises he made were contradictory to one another. But I do agree, Jinnah even remotely had no interest in creating an Islamic state of the type we have in Iran or Saudi Arabia. He thought that such a state would somehow include Islamic principles and be democratic also in some ways. I even go to the point of presenting facts that despite all the communalism that he was using, when it came to the question of women, Jinnah was always forward-looking. There is not a single statement when he says Muslim women should not come out in the public and get education and so on. So he was a modern man, but he was a man full of great vanity, and he wanted to be the leader of first of all Indians. When that was not possible, he managed to become the leader of all Muslims. And I've shown the argument, the Congress telling, for example, in one of the letters to Subhash Chandra Bose, he says that, Bose says that, look, we recognize that the Muslim League is a major party of the Muslims, but we have many other parties of the Muslims as well. So how can we reject them? Jinnah says, no, you have to not only accept that the Muslim League is the only party of all Muslims, but that Congress is a Hindu party. Now, do you think he was looking for a negotiated settlement? Once you say that, when a party had for 50 years been struggling to create a secular India, right or wrong, that's not important. To tell them that not only you accept us as the sole party of the Muslims, but that you are also a Hindu party. It's all given there. So I don't think I have overstated the facts. I think all the facts were needed to be brought in the public. That others have been lazy in not doing it can't be held against me, I would say. I've ensured that nothing is missed where any doubt can be cast. So that's Professor Mishra. With Pervez, we agree on so many things, and he has been a great strength to me in the way we look upon Pakistan. We do it with a lot of goodwill and good intentions, but Pakistan was a mess as an idea. When it came into being, it became a greater mess. What did Jinnah do to give Pakistan a democratic head start? Did he become the Prime Minister of Pakistan and ensure that the parliamentary system was strengthened? No. He became the Governor General, and he acquired powers which even the viceroys didn't have. Mountbatten, that we, in Pakistan portray as the villain of the peace, it is through him that Jinnah got the 1935 Act and the 1947 July Act amended to give him powers, extraordinary powers. What did he use them to his advantage? To dismiss an elected government and set a precedent which came to haunt Pakistan much later. He dismissed a government in Sindh where the only problem was that Ayub Khodu was saying Karachi should belong to Sindh, but he made it arbitrarily part of the federal territory. Goes to East Pakistan, 55% of the population of Pakistan, Bengali speaking, and tells them, I make it very clear, the national language of Pakistan will be Urdu. So all the subsequent problems, the breakup of Bangladesh finally, the fact that so much of confusion about his vision is there is because he had no vision. In Punjabi, we say, Peer sabnu putter denda hai. People wanting a child, coming to a holy man, the holy man takes some small, gift and then says, well, so, Allah will bless you not only with a child, but a son. That's what people are looking for. So to the Islam Pasands, he is on record saying, how is it possible that there will be a Pakistan where 75% of the people would be Muslims, and can they make laws against the Sharia? No question. And then even after Pakistan came into being, 11th August speech is already discussed, and what Pervez has said is exactly 100% my position. But 14th of August, when Mountbatten gets up and says that, well, Muslims have had great leaders like, for example, Akbar, Jinnah gets up and says, well, Akbar is all right, but our main source of inspiration is Prophet Muhammad, who first defeated the Jews and Christians and then treated them well. So he brings back this idea of a perfect ruler in the form of the Holy Prophet, which now Imran Khan is using right, left, and center all the time. So all this you can trace back to Jinnah. People start accusing, Ziaul Haq for all the Islamization, rightly so, but actually the roots go way back. Who declared the Ahmadis not Muslims? Not Ziaul Haq, but Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, popularly elected on the platform, on a manifesto of Islamic socialism. So within the framework of a state created in the name of Islam, whether there is such a theory in the Quran or not, and I don't think there is a theory in my book, The Concept of an Islamic State, I say that if at all there is a theory in the Quran, it is sui generis. Sui generis means unique, that of a prophet in power. Once the prophet is gone, there is no direction in the Quran as to what to do. And then what happened subsequently in history has become the Islamic narrative on the state, right or wrong. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think Jinnah was confused about what he wanted. He wanted the division of India, which Aisha Jalal tries to deny by excluding all the speeches which support this point of view. But in order to get Pakistan, he had to mobilize Muslim opinion on two bases. The fear of Hindus. He said Islam will be annihilated. Then he said Muslims will be obliterated in a united India. And these are extreme statements. He accused the Congress ministries of 2 years of being anti-Muslim in totality, whereas I've quoted Lilith and the British governors who were rabidly against the Congress, saying there is no evidence of that. In fact, when Gandhi ji came to Bihar, when the first government was formed, he is on record saying that Ram Raj for me means Krishna and Ram are not historical figures. I may not quote them, but Abu Bakr and Umar are real. The type of government they established should be a source of inspiration for you. And what he meant was just rulers who lived an ordinary life. I mean, that is what the Muslims believe. So Gandhi ji was not using religion to divide people, but to use the best parts of religion to bring people together. So there is a world of a difference between what Gandhi did with religion and what Jinnah did with religion. And Jinnah did it with a purpose to divide India And subsequently, to this day, we have had 4 wars with India. We have ruined ourselves in a hatred of India. And we don't have the time for the Kashmir dispute, but I've even shown there that there was an offer from India that you keep Kashmir, but don't interfere in Hyderabad. And Jinnah just dismissed it. And I quote Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, his confidant, saying that Jinnah, the clever tactician, was aiming for something higher when it came to the princely states, but obviously he failed. So Jinnah overplayed his hands many times. In 1944, Mahatma Gandhi was willing to accept Pakistan, but his plea was that, okay, the Muslims want Pakistan. After the war, we can have a plebiscite in those areas where Muslims are in a majority, but everybody will have the right to vote, not only Muslims, but Hindus and Sikhs as well. And Jinnah said, well, plebiscite yet, but only for Muslims. Now, how does that make sense? If Muslims, who are a 25% minority, concentrated in 2 regions, demand the partition of India, do you think if this had been put to the vote for the whole population of India, would the Hindus vote for the partition of India? No. So if a minority can demand the partition of India in areas where they are in a majority, can we deny the same right to the non-Muslims in those 2 areas where in some places they are in a majority? Like of the 29 districts of Punjab, 17 were Muslim majority and 12 were Hindu-Sikh majority. Don't they have the right then to exercise the same right of self-determination? Jinnah was not willing to concede anything which is acceptable under the modern rules of democracy, the question of self-determination, the question of a parliamentary system. He destroyed, there's a book by an American, Alan McGrath, The Destruction of Democracy, and he derives much of his material from Khalid bin Said, Pakistan, the Formative Phase. So for me, Jinnah wanted the partition of India with a vengeance, and as a lawyer, which he was greatly skilled with, he was able to win the case. That credit must be given to him. I may not admire his ideology, but I can't help admiring the fact that one man could stand up to Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Abul Kalam Azad, Jamiyat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, and the British, and finally get a Pakistan indeed not what he wanted, but a moth-eaten one. But that's what the facts are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq. Now we have a next question answer session, but Kanwal Dhaliwal think if we will ask Professor Mishra to discuss with his 3rd point, which he want to discuss. So is that possible, Dr. Mishra? Could you kindly?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, one point that I can think straight away, which we have not come across, and it's there in the book, is that British had their own priorities, their preferences. There was nothing fixed or given about those priorities. They were also constantly undergoing changes. For instance, between the cabinet mission of 1946 and the Mountbatten Plan of 1947, the British priorities from their military, from their strategic, from their diplomatic vantage point, they went through a great change. At the time of the cabinet mission, the priority was somehow to work for a united India, which in the long run would protect British interests, their strategic interests much better. There is always this fear of the USSR. But within 1 year's time, I think on the basis of some military inputs and other things, their priorities do go through a change. And then priority very much is to go in for a partition and to maybe have a weak Pakistan, which would serve the British strategic interests better in the long run. This, I thought, was a very important point, which I have not come across elsewhere. So maybe Ishtiaq Sahab can talk about it. Because when we talk of the priorities, long-term priorities, we tend to treat them as somewhat fixed and somewhat given. But I think it's a very interesting idea to see those priorities also as constantly undergoing modifications and changes and so on. So.
Dr. Ishtiaq Sahab, please.
Indeed, I am so glad this point has been brought forward because there is a video I've done called Did the British Mastermind the Partition of India? And there I elaborate this point. In 1943, when the second Viceroy came in, Lord Wavell, the outgoing Viceroy, Linlithgow, said, we are here for another 30 years. Now that would have meant 1973. So the British had no plans to leave India. Then comes the Second World War and all the problems, and then we have the INA, and then the naval uprising and the Quit India movement, which of course Linlithgow crushed brutally. But it was clear that the time for the British was out. And although the British won the war, their economy was smashed. They were almost insolvent. There was rationing, much worse than rationing in the Indian subcontinent. And they were heavily under debt to the Americans. So American pressure to leave India was intense. And then Churchill, the arch imperialist, is defeated and the Labour comes into power. And then Mountbatten is given two, I think, briefs. One overt, that is to transfer power to India united or divided. And second, to ensure that both India and Pakistan are convinced to join the British Commonwealth. And Mountbatten's skills are exactly directed to that, those two objectives. 11th May 1946, the Supreme Commander in South Asia, Field Marshal Auchinleck, wrote a memorandum pro and con of Pakistan. And he argues that creating Pakistan would mean dividing the institution we have created to defend India, which is the British Indian Army, which he thought was a big risk. Also, if Pakistan is created, then India might be tempted to lean towards the Soviet Union. So for those reasons, then on the 11th of May, finally he concludes we should not have partition or Pakistan. But then, of course, I have quoted, when he wrote this, his immediate subordinate officer, General Wayne, wrote, I do not agree. So already in the British records, you find that this conclusion was challenged by his own officers. And then I quote Francis Tucker, Lieutenant General Francis Tucker, who was the head of the Eastern Command, where he says that we have to create an Islamic arch beginning in Algeria, into Arabia Deserta, into Persia, and then northern India. A Muslim state armed with Islam and British sciences. So you see this shift in favor of the partition. Why? And then on the 12th of May, 1947, 1 year, 1 day later, there is a memorandum prepared by the three heads of the British Armed Forces, Navy, Army, and Air Force, Field Marshal Montgomery, and some people from the Colonial Office in favor of the partition, saying that if India is partitioned now, and they also write, Hindustan may go its own way, but Mr. Jinnah has showed an interest in joining the Commonwealth. Okay? And then they say, we should demand from Pakistan access to Karachi port facilities, Pakistani airfields, and Muslim manpower. Manpower means the Pakistan army, which apparently they thought Jinnah was willing to grant, whereas they could not trust India under Nehru and the socialists and the anti-imperialists and all that. So that's the shift. And that finally is the 3 June plan. And out of it comes the partition. So did the British mastermind the partition of India? Not in the sense that this was a plan already way back in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 19th century, towards which they worked. You know, that's the conspiracy theory with which people are easily attracted to, that the British had this agenda, the Hindus had this agenda, the Muslims another agenda. I have looked at the situation and seen how the balance of power is shifting and what possibilities and options are available for the different actors. And in the end, the British want to create Pakistan because for them, that's the state which will serve them in their imperialist interests. The irony, the tragedy is that the British were reduced to nothing. The Americans kicked them out. But who served then Pakistan against Soviet Union in the Afghan Jihad? Was it not Pakistan? So the British plan actually was put into practice by the Americans, but it's basically a British thinking. So I'm very glad Professor Mishra has taken up this point, because in most of the discussions, somehow ideologically, it's like Hindus and Muslims, India and Pakistan. But what about the power which had the final decision? And what decision did they give and why? I think I've demonstrated it in my book, and let's see who challenges it.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are inviting questions on Zoom and as well as on Facebook, because many people are watching on Facebook. Okay. And Kamal is getting questions from Facebook. Vinod Mubai, they have some comments. Vinodji, could you kindly?
Yes, thank you very much. The comment I wish to raise, which I learned from reading Ishtiaq Bhai's book, which I have spent some time doing, is very well articulated by Salil Mishra and by Ishtiaq's own response, which is, I've been wondering, so let me just say that as a 6-year-old in late 1947, first grade in Lahore, we became refugees at that time, and I've spent a lifetime trying to understand what was the reason, because I hear my grandfather, who was in his late 70s at that time, Rai Saab Manornath, saying to his Muslim neighbor, Raja badalte hain, praja to nahi badalti. He did not know the concept of ethnic cleansing that was too new at that time. So what I learned from Ishtiaq's book was that the crucial role played by the British colonial power in finally making partition happen. And I think that has been, and I'm very glad that was brought up in the last set of responses. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Vinodji. Now it's Wahid Bhatti from Netherlands. He raised his hand. Wahid Saab?
Ji, thank you. Thank you. Fantastic program, but I will just cut it short. I think I have a question or two. Dr. Saab, despite the positions taken by, as you mentioned, by Karl Marx, Engels, and Joseph Stalin, Trotsky, etc., on the national question, and despite the fact that there were clear indications that Pakistan potentially will be used as a frontline state against Soviet Union, why did the communist India support the partition? That is one question. And second, I just a very quick one. You have used the terminology theonomy and nomocracy in your book. Would you like to briefly elaborate on that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wahid Bhai. These are two very central questions. Of course, this is still not clear why did the Communist Party of India, of all the parties which was anti-imperialist, could not see that the Muslim League was a party with no record of anti-imperialism. These were all collaborative landlords and professionals. And I have no good explanation, but recently somebody said that this fellow Adhikari who wrote it was actually a British agent. No, I think that sort of explanation is too bad for me to accept. I think the problem was that until the Soviet Union was attacked, the communists of India, like communists anywhere, were calling it an imperialist war in which they had no role to play. But the day the Soviet Union was attacked, they said this is now a people's war against Nazism, fascism, to save the Soviet state. Now, its consequences were that Soviet Union and the British became allies in the war against Nazi Germany. So its consequences in India were that I'm sure the Russians must have said, you soften your anti-British stance and work towards it. Or it was some discussion within the Indian communists, and they said that we will support the war effort. And so once the war effort was, in 1942, finally, publicly, they could have their offices all over India. Previously, the Communist Party had existed for many years. They would have an office here, but there would be a police raid and it was closed and all. But 42, it was finally accepted by the British. And Faiz Ahmed Faiz Saab, because, for example, joined the information services and became a colonel in the British Army. But just a few weeks earlier, they were all saying that this is an imperialist war. So, like Muslims who are always looking towards the greater interest of Islam, communists are internationalists for good and bad. They thought that once the Soviet Union is so, but does this mean that they should have also supported the two-nation theory? It doesn't. Why did they do it? Makes no sense to me, but it's a very communalist standpoint. For example, they say that oppressed nationalities in India have the right to self-determination. Then they mention the linguistic minorities, Sindhis, Bengalis, Odisas, Gujaratis, you name them, they are all there. When it comes to the Punjab, this thing is gone. They say the Sikhs and the Muslims. So the two-nation theory gets accepted through Muslims and Sikhs being declared oppressed nationalities who have the right of self-determination. Now, the Sikhs didn't pay any heed to that, but the Muslim League let these people join the Muslim League and make speeches, because up until then, the ulama were only talking about Islam and so on. Now came Abdullah Malik and so many others who added that the Hindu was the oppressor, the moneylender, all these arguments, class-based arguments in the favor of the Muslim League were brought by the communists, not knowing that the people who were leading the Muslim League were all big landlords. So for me, this has been a major betrayal of the anti-imperialist agenda the communists were following up until then. I think that is one explanation. The second one is, Wahid Bhai, repeat the question.
Yeah, that was the use of theonomy and nomocracy.
Yeah. This was not brought up in our discussion. When we say among Muslims, anybody can say it. Maududi would say it, Jinnah would say it, anybody would say that there is no theocracy in Islam. But I have looked at this, that while saying that there is no theocracy in Islam, they keep on saying that Sharia is the law, supreme law. What does it mean? So then I've come up with the argument that there is a concept called theonomy, which means that the laws of God will prevail.
Mhm.
Okay? So the supremacy of the law is granted, but not of the priests. The milder version of it is that nomocracy, which also means that the laws are supreme. But here, in the nomocratic way of looking at it, you can say that not only the ulama would be the interpreters of the will of God, but all elected members in the National Assembly. So that's the difference. But I'm saying that to say that there is no theocracy does not lead to democracy or a secular state. That's a fallacy. It leads to a type of Muslim state, which is either a hardcore dominated Sharia, the way Maududi would interpret, or a more liberal type where you can mix democracy and human rights and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. There is another question from Ibrar Ahmed from Islamabad.
Okay.
Ibrar, could you ask your question, please?
Assalamualaikum.
So,
मेरा question इश्तियाक साहब से है, and thank you for your the nice talk. Number one is I think the British play a crucial role in the formulation of two-nation theory, even from the time of Sir Sayyid. And they want divide India into Muslim and Hindu state. They were agree for that. And even the demand of the Muslim League and the Quaid-e-Azam, they want a Muslim state under British rule. And similar was the Nehru report. They were also asking independence under the British rule. I think both Indian Congress and the Muslim League want a sort of dominion state, not the independent state as we are thinking about. And number two is, what is the American role for the independence of India, especially India, and the whole decolonization process?
Okay, thank you. I get your question. Now, I think the first part is partially correct, that dividing in Hindus and Muslims was a convenient way to divide and rule. This is imperialist policy. But dividing them to create two separate states was not their objective. Within a British Empire, if these two are not working together, it's good for the British. But at the end, partition and independence came. That's what we are saying. There is nothing written in history. It all depends on the circumstances. The British at the beginning of the war were a great power. At the end of the war, they were reduced to nothing. They were living on, British Americans paying the salaries of their officers. They were in such a bad state. The Americans bought all their higher technology, So the UK was reduced to nothing. So in that sense, it is right to say that the British divided or wanted Hindus and Muslims not to cooperate after 1857. There I agree with you. But they were not aiming to give India independence and create India or Pakistan. I would strongly disagree with you that the Muslim League and the Congress were only two British parties, not at all. Who went to jail? Who suffered for the freedom of India? Can you name a single Muslim leaguer? But I can give you legions of names of Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and the rest who were incarcerated by the British, mainly from the platform of the Indian National Congress. And after the Nehru report, 1929, Lahore, my home city, in December, the Indian National Congress held its annual session and demanded independence for India. And Jamiyat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, which was against the Nehru report, then joined this because they also wanted freedom from British rule. So here you have a very sizable, important Islamic party deciding to support this. So thereafter, you give me a single example of the Congress ever, retreating from the demand from independence. They never did. They kept on. It is only the Muslim League who wanted British rule to continue. And of course, you mention Iqbal's speech. I have given the whole speech. It's unbelievable. People keep talking about that speech, but they don't read what he has written. He's saying that British rule in India would not be possible without the support of the Muslims. And the Muslims are in the army and in the police and in disproportionately bigger numbers. So British rule in India is because of Muslim support. One thing he's saying. And second, when he was confronted about this idea, if this was pan-Islamism, there's a letter written, I think, in the Times of London by Iqbal saying that not at all. How can Muslims think of having a state outside the British Empire? We will be the frontline state of the British Empire to take the first brunt of any attack from the northwest. So Iqbal retreated from it. Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, now and never, writing a letter to the Lords, British Lords, asking for their support to create Pakistan. And I've argued, how's that possible? Only 15 years earlier, the same Lords had dismembered the Ottoman Empire. Why would they now want an Islamic or Muslim state for the Muslims? So if you look at Churchill and the rest, Churchill hated Hindus as well as Islam. I have given both his speeches. But in the case of India, he supported the Muslims against the Hindus. That's how imperialism works. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Saab. This is Naim Malak from Birmingham. Naim, could you ask your question or we can read for you? Naim?
Yeah, I think the question I wanted to ask was that there are two questions really. First of all, I think what's happening in India in terms of with the Modi regime, how does that relate to partition being right or wrong? And also, there was actually an agreement reached between the Muslim League and the Congress or whatever parties involved for a federated India. And that was, I think that was possibly Nehru made an instrumental part in destroying that agreement, according to Abdul Kalam Azad anyway. So how do you match those things together with the thesis you're putting forward?
Very good. Thank you so much. Very, very important questions both, and I'm glad you asked them. First of all, what is happening in India is exactly what Jinnah was told on the 30th of March 1941 by the Muslims of Kanpur, that after the Lahore Resolution, you are creating Pakistan in areas where there is already a Pakistan. What will happen to those Muslims who will be left in India? And I've quoted Jinnah, and I think quoting Jinnah is very important. Otherwise, you can just avoid the hard facts. He says, I will make 2 crore Muslims. Now he was counting it wrong. He should have said 3 crore. But 2 crore Muslims go through martyrdom, shahadat, and will have them smashed, and to liberate 7 crore from the yoke of Hinduism. So who abandoned the Muslims in India? Jinnah was willing to do it. I think, secondly, if you look at the way we have treated our minorities and even Muslims, despite the BJP and all, the Hindus and the Imam Bargas, the mosques have not been blown up or attacked with machine gun, people killing one another. But we have done it on many occasions since the 1990s. So is our treatment of Muslims any better than what the BJP is doing? And how did the BJP come into power? You have to look at that. In 99, Vajpayee Saab comes to Lahore and the Lahore Accord is agreed. And what do? They do Kargil and destroy that possibility. Narendra Modi comes to a private wedding of the Sharifs, and when he leaves, they carry out Pathankot. So, do you think the Hindus will never react to our use of terrorism? What about from 1989 onwards, the people we have been promoting? You know, when I used to go to Pakistan, every Friday there were these different, places where you could put money for the Jaish-e-Muhammad or Lashkar-e-Taiba or Harkatul Muslimin who were fighting for jihad in the Indian Kashmir. What about Mumbai? Actually, Mumbai was attacked twice. At some point, the Hindus would have reacted, and now they are reacting. So you have to remember that.
Thank you very much.
I think there was a second part of the question, which
The
is
second part was, yes. Well, actually, that's wrong. There was no agreement on a federal, on a shared constitution for India. The cabinet mission plan failed because Jinnah insisted that 50-50% representation, even that was granted. But he wanted, you see, the cabinet mission plan had three components. One was that the center will have only defense, foreign affairs, and communications, and no right to taxation beyond that. For me, who's a political scientist, this is an invitation to trouble from day one. How can a state of the nature and the magnitude of India have an ineffective center? Just look at what Jinnah did when Pakistan came into being. In order to get into control, he created a 10 times, 100 times stronger center. Without a center, there is no state. One. So this was questionable for the Congress. The second was that every 10 years, the three groups they had created, A, B, and C. B and C were Muslim majority. A was Hindu majority provinces. The Sikhs of Punjab said, we don't want to be in group B. We don't want to be in part of a Muslim-dominated group B. Also in the same group, the Khudwai Khidmatgar said, we don't want to be in this group. So already there was opposition to this grouping which the British did. But the groups every 10 years had the right to leave the union as a group or individually as a province. Now tell me which state, which before it comes into being is already threatened by this precarious nature of the union. It can be broken up anytime. And the third was that the princely states, 564, 65, surrendered only foreign affairs and defense. The internal domain was left to the princes. And for example, if let's say Congress and Muslim League both had agreed that we will have universal adult franchise, well, they had no right under that plan to demand the 565 princely states to grant the right to vote to their citizens. That was not part of the deal. So if you look at that cabinet mission plan, it was unworkable. Second part, it had two components. One was the administrative one, which I've narrated to you about. The second was that the Constituent Assembly, which was elected, would frame a constitution for India. Jinnah refused to go to the Constituent Assembly, saying we will not frame the constitution for India. So he half accepted this plan. The Congress said we will not accept this administrative bit, but we will go to the Constituent Assembly and frame a constitution for India, for a free India. I think once India came into being, for many years, I think there were seats vacant for people which for areas which had become of Pakistan to return if they wanted to. So, of course, the whole cabinet mission plan was a British tactic, because if you look at what the military was saying, that the cabinet mission plan should then be attached to the British through a defense treaty. And this was also not acceptable to the Congress. They don't want to be an appendage of British imperialism.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. There is one question on Facebook, but first I want to take question from Muhammad Amar, who is in London at the moment. Amar, could you ask your question, please?
Hi, sir. Thank you very much. My question is with Ishtiaq Ahmed Sab and Pervez Hoodbhoy. You know, we always, when criticize Jinnah, his politics, we always use that he was egoistic and had a pride. So does it mean that he was not ready to compromise with political opponents? Or my other question, does ego of leaders help or damage nation? And how, I mean, how we balance leadership, how he balanced this ego for the nation or for his decisions? Thank you.
Pervez, would you like to do it, or should I? Yeah.
Very briefly,
Yeah.
We can see what impact partition had upon Muslims. Forget about Hindus. Muslims were split into 3 separate geographical regions. There was India, West Pakistan, East Pakistan. East Pakistan then breaks away. This was because Mr. Jinnah felt that Hindus and Muslims could never live together. And whether it was his genuine conviction or whether it was his ego, it doesn't matter. The fact is that 75 years later, we are faced, Muslims are faced, forget Hindus, that's a separate issue altogether, with this awful fact that they are no better off than they were. In fact, arguably, the Muslims in India are suffering greatly. They were abandoned by Jinnah, and Jinnah knew that. Jinnah knew that. In fact, every time Abul Kalam Azad asked him, what will happen to us? He would meet a blank wall. Students at Aligarh Muslim University asked him, and he would tell them to shut up. And so, look, it's impossible at this stage to say what ego, whether he was driven by ego or driven by a genuine sympathy, empathy for Muslims of India, but the consequences are there before us.
I would only like to add that if the Muslim community of India overrepresented in the army and in the police and concentrated in 2 areas, were in a united India, their ability to work out a negotiated, democratic, pluralist formula was much stronger than if you divide the Muslims, abandon them to India, let's say, and leave it for the Indian leaders then to take care of them. And we should put on record about being selfish and egoist. There is a very good example. Mahatma Gandhi, who led the struggle, he didn't take any public office. That's what the father of a nation should do. Jinnah should have just given the chance to others to create a democratic Pakistan. What he does is just the opposite. Become a governor general, arms him with powers which are unthinkable in a democracy, and the basis of democracy is destroyed in Pakistan. So whether that is ego or whatever, I think that's not important. The consequences we are living with.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Kamalji, could you ask the Facebook question?
Yeah, there is a question from Shri Prakash. I'll put the question. I think it could be for Professor Salil Mishra more than to the others. He says, but sir, why even after independence, the Indian leftist intellectuals are not able to decode this issue? I think he means by what the Jinnah issue or his role.
No, they have been able to decode Indian communists. There has been a lot of reconsideration, a lot of thinking. There is a frank recognition that it was a tactical, strategic error to treat the Muslim League movement at par with the movement for independence. There was on ethical, moral, ideological, on the programmatic basis, the two were not to be placed at par. But there was the context of the war, and I think Ishtiaq Sahab explained that. So there was a recognition by the left that it was a tactical error. It was it was a mistake. It was a strategic mistake to support the movement for Pakistan under the name that it's Muslim People's Movement. There is a revision, and there was a recognition of this error. So it's not true that they have not been able to come to terms.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Wahid want to ask again the question. Wahid?
Maybe he's just left.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more or less is 1 hour, 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So maybe I can ask the last question, Dr. Saab. So we have a very bad past and in subcontinent. What's happened? It's not nice, but what is the future we can see in subcontinent?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. And the future is the facts as we see them. There is no chance India and Pakistan can reunite. That is out of the question. But there should be an acceptance that we are part of this region. We have to take responsibility for our populations, for the climate change, for the global warming, for the water issue. I mean, day-to-day survival, senseless problems. But Pakistan, and now India, if you want to say, but Pakistan definitely prioritizes its ideology over rational issues. I have recently said, what is the problem when China and India can sort out their problems? Huh? Why can't we do with India? During the disaster, this floods, they said we will not import anything from India or take any aid from India. They did it in 2005 and I think 2010. Why? Because the Indians have done away with Article 370. No, I'm not a defender of Article 370 at all. But I'm saying this was done, it was just an administrative change in the way they were dealing with Kashmir. And let the Indians sort it out, and the Supreme Court, not my problem. Unless they cross the line of control and attack Pakistan, I have no problem with the Indians. For me, there was an offer and a chance that Kashmir could be either independent or even become part of Pakistan, as Patel offered. But Jinnah refused. He just kicked out those possibilities, hoping that he will win all ends, Then you have 3 wars. And now after all the wars and the ceasefire line, and then the line of control and the dossiers which the Indians have about the UN resolutions and we have, and then the Shimla agreement, there is no chance in a million that Kashmir status will ever be changed, except that the line of control is the de facto international border. Make it the international border as as Manmohan Singh and Musharraf were almost agreed to. It didn't happen. And let Kashmiris start meeting one another in a more natural manner while we grant India sovereignty to its Kashmir and we assume sovereignty to our Kashmir. Because these are the facts. And let there be trade between India and Pakistan. This Chinese Belt and Road thing is also obstructed by what is happening at the Wagah-Atari border. Part of that grand plan is that India somehow will be included at some point. But keeping India out seems to be the only preoccupation, fixation, infatuation, obsession that our power elite is concerned about. I'm sure if we were to change our ways, Indians would follow suit. But it has to start with Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we are very thankful to all of our participants, and especially Dr. Ishtiaq, Professor Mishra, and Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy. And we are very grateful. Now, formally, we are going to stop this recording, and informally after that, we can continue our discussion, and people want, if they have any question, we can informally have discussion after this. Kamalji, could you stop recording, and then maybe Wahid want to ask question?
Yeah.